Discover the power of music to heal and uplift. Introducing NeuroVibe, where rhythm meets recovery. NeuroVibe fuses ambient music textures with rhythmic layers to create music that goes beyond relaxation. It's crafted to resonate deeply, perfect for relaxation, self-reflection, or therapeutic sessions. NeuroVibe invites you to connect with your inner self through immersive sound. Explore NeuroVibe today on SoundCloud and experience the transformative power of music. Tune in, find your vibe, and discover what NeuroVibe can do for you. For more information, check out NeuroVibe on SoundCloud today at soundcloud.com/NeuroVibe-brainspotting. NeuroVibe is intended for general wellness and relaxation purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Explore NeuroVibe now on SoundCloud. Dive in, find your rhythm, and feel better with NeuroVibe.
Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with you. And I want to remind you as always that this is for educational and entertainment purposes. This does not constitute working with a mental health professional, and strongly suggest finding one that's in your area or online if you have to work on these issues, because right now it is a tumultuous time. And let's just be frank, we're going to be talking about comic book culture, and there is a line from today, from the one we're going to be talking about today, that just sort of reinforces that idea that if we're dealing with all of these things, we need our mental health. So I want to also welcome back, as always, our Dr. Mercedes Samudio, who is here going to be talking about Ironheart with us. How you doing today?
I am great and excited to be talking about this today.
Beautiful. Yeah, we're going to forego the bio introduction because you've been here enough times, and if anyone else has listened to our past episodes, then you know they're listening. But I want to start off with that comment that was made in, I think, the first episode, where Riri basically says, if the world's not being attacked by giant monsters, aliens, some sort of magical force, it's become the daily thing, or at least weekly thing in this universe, that at some point these people are all living with that constant experience.
Yes, exactly. And I kind of love that about the MCU now, that in the Infinity Saga, the superheroes just kind of acted, and there was no ramifications, there was no discussion around what was happening to people. Mm-hmm. And I feel like now in the multiversal saga, where we are now, moving into Doomsday and Secret Wars and all that good stuff, we're starting to get characters who are dealing with the world that the Infinity Saga created for them. Mm-hmm. For me, I think that's why I'm really appreciating shows like Ironheart that showcase, and Hawkeye and Miss Marvel, mm-hmm. all of those shows that really showcase, we've got heroes that are living in a world where, despite all this mysticism and all this magic, they're still dealing with things like grief and overwhelm, mm-hmm. in a world that doesn't always see them, mm-hmm. at all. Mm-hmm. She also says in that episode too, I want to say the first and the second episode, I could do a lot of things with my mind, but everybody wants an Iron Man suit. People will only see me if I do an Iron Man suit. And I think that really kind of goes along with what we're going to be talking about today, about like, how do you live up to that legacy? What do you have to do? And why do comic books kind of always use this story as a way to define them?
Right. Because we were just talking before we started recording about the aspect of, is like, I'm kind of getting, how many times is the storyline going either into revenge, either from the villain or from literally the hero, or is it going into, they've lost their loved one and now they are moving heaven and earth and even willing to literally destroy the very universe, the What If series, to try and rescue this love, even though it's ultimately also damaging the place that their love is supposed to be in, and it's part of their love. So there's an aspect there where it's like, and this may also be another component to the superhero fatigue we're seeing, is that the range of stories that we need to see more from these characters keep getting pigeonholed in these two particular particular major themes. And it doesn't mean that those themes don't exist as a constant, but it gets a little, and now at this age, I'm a little tired of those being the constant thing that is driving a story, which also leads me to ask the question is like, what is this also reflecting on what their current situation, the world is?
Yeah. I actually am on the other side of the spectrum. I love these type of stories because they begin to continue to show us the different ways in which people actually deal with grief. They actually deal with poverty. They actually deal with the world that doesn't have them always included in the narrative. And so while we allow Doctor Strange and Peter Quill and Iron Man to kind of be these messy people, we sometimes get fatigued right when we're getting to the marginalized identities existing in the same way. And so sometimes I challenge people to say, is it really fatigue that we're feeling? Or are we having a hard time seeing those exact same themes humanized in more marginalized, less represented characters? And so I always ask that question because, we're so used to seeing Tony Stark's, rich white guys, Bruce Wayne's, fuck up all the time. And then they use their money or their charm to manage. And we're like, woo, we cheer for them. Well, I'm now looking at people like Riri, right, who has so much potential. And at the same time, why are we asking a 19-year-old to be something bigger than what we even asked Tony Stark to be? Right? And so I always challenge people when we get to this space of fatigue where I'm asking, are we really fatigued with the actual themes? Or are we starting to realize that there might be something going on here in these gaps, some bias, right? Some places where people have a hard time really paying attention. I like to call these our obscure areas where we don't realize, right? Where we don't realize that those biases and those narratives that we hold on to, they're actually blocking our ability to humanize someone who really needs to be humanized and needs to be represented. And so that's kind of where I am with that. And I think these stories need to be told with these identities.
Oh, yeah.
So we can see that human space as well there with them.
No disagreement there. I fully agree with that.
Yeah.
Just on that, I think on the larger scale, that I just think that, because as I was talking to my partner, is like, I think that's also one of the problems we're having too with every year having an event when originally it's like every 2 or 3 years, which also meant that there was a lot more time for character development and build up.
Yeah.
And also that problem, I think, that is hitting a lot of the, especially as they're doing some of these newer heroes, they don't have the story repertoire to pull from to build that insight.
And
it gives them a chance to develop it.
Here. I feel like, I'll give you this though. I feel like Riri, even though I haven't read her whole run, has been in the comic space for, let's give her a decade.
Yeah,
right?
No.
For about a decade, she's been in and out of the comic space, so she has some space here. What I like, and we talked about this during the Wakanda Forever podcast, is this. Riri was actually introduced into the MCU in an amazing way, and I think it was a really organic way. And so for people who I feel like did not watch Wakanda Forever, for a myriad of reasons, there's some biases here, and I think we talked about that a lot too in the Wakanda Forever episode, but Riri, I think, has actually had a lot of time to breathe in the MCU. Her entrance in Wakanda Forever was really well done. Not only does she get some time to show up, I love that Shuri actually takes all that away from her, because Shuri still is in her character of, we can't keep letting Wakandan technology be out in the world, so I'm going to have to take this back. That puts Riri at the beginning of Ironheart with all of these cool connections, but she still has to figure out, under the weight of being a Black girl in Chicago, right, how to make a name for herself. And I think that story for me is a really human story, because that's something that I resonated with, being at a PWI similar to Riri at that age, thinking, how do I make a name for myself when what society wants is so different than what I have access to, if that makes sense.
Which is another.
So that's why I think she has a lot of story there. She's had like all that story. I didn't just make that up. That's in Wakanda Forever and the first couple episodes of Ironheart. Like, it's there.
Right. Fully agree. I'm talking more. I'm also just talking more as what we get to see in the comic books, which again is where all of this starts from, and having all the legacy stories. I mean, we got the aspects of Infinity War and the Endgame because of all the history and time that went into building those stories and those character developments. And the turnaround churn time we're seeing in this industry also makes it hard not to have those, to continue to have these characters. So we do need things like the MCU to help develop those storylines. But that aspect of having them played out and tested there first is something we lack. Now, that said, one of the other criticisms, as we've talked about here too, is the standpoint of, Riri had to do all of these things to be able to fund her suit. How is this any different than Peter Parker originally selling all of his fight scenes with Goblin and the Sinister Six to the Daily Bugle to afford his web fluid and his rent?
Yes. And I'm going to throw this out there just because Superman is out. Superman does some really unethical things too, where Clark Kent, is always interviewing Superman. Like, again, with our cis-het white characters, we allow them to do some unethical, unsavory things. Peter Quill was a Ravager. He literally spent his time going around stealing artifacts and selling them to the highest bidder. You know what I'm saying? Tony Stark was an arms dealer and made a lot of his money by selling his technology to the highest bidder. Right? And so I feel like a lot of the times our superheroes find that their genius isn't always engaged with on an ethical, legal level, right? They tend to find that when they're smart, they've got to do other things to gain the type of notoriety. We allow that for our cis-het white characters, but there seems to be a lot of criticism when it happens to any other marginalized character. We begin to look at them and think, oh, is something wrong with them? Oh, like, are they bad? Why are they representing something that's such a stereotype? And what I have been really trying to put out there into the world is this. And Ebony, Elizabeth Thomas, I know you know her, right? The Dark Fantastic.
I have her book.
I have
I haven't
wonderful
finished reading
space. Yeah.
And for those listening, the book that was held up was Dark Fantastic.
Yes. Yes, by Ebony Elizabeth Thomas. And so I bring that up because her theory of the Dark Fantastic is that for Black women to show up in fantasy and always be the savior and always be the catharsis, that's not realistic. Black women deserve to show up as her identity, right? What she talks about, her theory, this Dark Fantastic, where they get to be full-bodied people, not at the mercy of the audience or the people. They get to have revenge. They get to be angry. They get to make decisions that we might disagree with, but it's because they're full-bodied people. And so when I look at Riri, I think she really is a wonderful example of kind of that identity of she actually isn't here for our catharsis. Some of the decisions she makes, you might wrestle with yourself. You might even struggle with and wonder, would I make that same decision? That, to me, is how we humanize these representations of what it means to be a hero, if that makes sense.
Very much so. And I think that also gets into some of the criticism, too, I think goes unsaid. As I was watching it, I couldn't help but think about what was going on between her and Parker's gang, or the Hood's gang, is how is this any different of the choices that happen to anybody who gets caught up in gang life?
Yeah, I love that you said that. And I love that his name is the Hood. Right, I won't take credit for this. This was actually Dr. Michelle Taylor, who goes by Feminista Jones on most socials. She actually said this as she was watching Ironheart, and I love that she said this because I felt the same way, that his name is the Hood. So he's constantly representing the neighborhood, the hood, that life of what happens when people have or get the access taken away from them and they have that grief and that anger. His name is literally the Hood. I thought that was such a clever understanding of this character, and you saying that, and that interplay between Riri really being pulled into the hood, right? Being pulled into that life because she doesn't always have the access and she doesn't always have the money. And, selling papers, at MIT is not going to pay for Iron Man Arbor. It just isn't, what I mean?
not at that particular level. But additionally, even going back to my comment about the idea of how people get caught up in gang life, there's also one of the other factors, which is not apparent in this story, is that she does, even though she has a family that is damaged because of death, she still has a very functional family. And how many times do those, and now this actually gets into stuff that we saw with Parker and the Hood and his team, was the idea of found family, but found family under the wrong auspices, which is why I say that standpoint of how many people find themselves caught up in the gang world because they're looking for that sense of family when their actual biological family has failed, which is the thing we don't like to talk about. But yes, families can fail.
Yes, exactly. And for each of these folks, especially with Parker's backstory, his family failed him horribly. Again, not trying to give any spoilers, but when you get to understand Parker's backstory, when he confronts his dad, the way his dad talks to him, it's like, ooh, it makes so much sense how the Hood and what the Hood represents, how it was able to just kind of influence him so deeply. But then when you juxtapose that with Riri, it's kind of almost the same, where you're right. Her family wasn't just torn apart by grief. Her family, and I want to highlight this, was torn apart by community violence. Community violence is something we often don't like to talk about, especially when we talk about the foundations for a lot of the people who are in this world. I'll do a little side note here. Chadwick Boseman himself has talked about the community violence that spurred him into becoming an actor and going ahead and going to Howard University, right? Like, community violence for a lot of folks. I grew up in South Central LA. There was a lot of community violence, and it really does become a foundation for how you show up in the world. The ACEs, our original ACEs, does not take into account community violence, but the Philadelphia ACEs actually does, right? And that's something that I think we need to pay attention to. That is actually an adverse childhood experience. And
well, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but no, because recently the Developmental Trauma Institute, under Steve Sawyer, I was helping him do a training on developmental trauma and the Digging Roots model back in May. One of the things we were discussing and trying to introduce there was the aspect of that we need a much broader form of the ACEs, which is the adverse child experience one, that is actually community-based as well. And so we were talking a lot about that during our training. And I will also just put the pitch out there that there's, you want to check out the Developmental Trauma Institute as well as a place to continue the work there. That aspect that the ACEs being still very limited in the nuclear family, the very limited structure, as opposed to, there's also communal and wide world aspects that are also affecting the way the adverse child experiences, because those are the next level of things that can influence how we are living, and even just the very fundamental concept of safety, which is one of the big things we see Riri is constantly struggling with, is the idea of safety, which is another reason why she built this suit. Yes.
And I'll give you that, like, even talking about that. So her community also is kind of racked by that community violence. It's one of the reasons why I think, despite the fact that she has community, they kind of let her run amok a little bit. They don't know how to kind of step in. They try to. You watch her mom try to step in. You watch her aunties try to step in. You even watch Natalie's brother, Xavier, try to step in and say, hey, what's going on? For me, that doesn't just show representation for what we do as humans when we're grieving. It's another layer there that also I want to talk about, which is that Black woman kind of aesthetic. She's a Black woman who's experienced community violence and has put it on herself to save her family. I'm going to build the armor that's going to protect my family. I'm going to make sure that everybody is protected. That's very much a Black woman trope that this young woman at 19 years old has taken on, because when she was younger, she couldn't. She didn't have the means to protect her stepdad and her best friend, right? And so that's on her as well.
True, and I think there's another standpoint, too, with that in the aspect of the developmental trauma, in this case, the trauma that happened, with how that is a recurring, constant loop of actions and justifications for her, which, at 19, she also doesn't have the long-term thinking yet. No. And I want to add this that I think a lot of people ignore. Riri also is really smart. She got into college at 15 years old.
this is part of my research, Perry. What we often see with Black tweens who are really smart is we often see that their emotional and mental development is kind of ignored because they're able to articulate and be so smart. And so with someone like Riri, what you notice is that because she's so smart, oftentimes the people around her aren't always caring for her emotional development. I believe that's how Natalie was able to become such a huge AI, that because all of her emotional development was kind of stymied, all of that came into Natalie becoming kind of the AI, if you will.
Yeah, I also have a different theory going to one of the other elements of this overall story, which by now, because it's all over the news and spoilers lurk, I honestly think Mephisto did that.
Brought Natalie back as AI. I don't disagree with that. And I say this because as I was watching it, there's this one scene where Mephisto begins to watch her immediately. The minute she connects with Parker, I'm not 100% sure that happened before or after, but I do know that as soon as she connected with Parker and Mephisto got kind of a sense of who she was, she was literally standing in front of a Faust poster talking to Natalie at one episode. And so I agree. I think definitely Mephisto had way more influence on the creation of Natalie than I think has been let on, for sure.
Right.
And I do think there's that emotional piece that because she's such an emotional piece and that was so heartbreaking for her, Mephisto used that, right? And so I still think it's part of her emotion. I still think that becomes a metaphor for her emotional kind of externalization, if you will.
Exactly. And then once Zamora is pulling energy from Damamo's universe, I think the two magics overloaded. And there is that point where Natalie can't continue to exist as the suit AI and is gone. And it's the price of magic, which is funny. But what happens when you have two different magics colliding?
Yes. I also say this with Zelma. I also think that because Zelma's magic wasn't actually cultivated at Comertage, she kind of did it on her own. And her mom, Mrs. Stanton, said that. Kind of created your own magic. I think her own magic paired with that little piece of Parker's robe and put into her suit, which had its own technological kind of advancements. I think it really did overload kind of that suit, if you will. And to be honest with you, I think it created a new type of magic. I think Zelma's magic is a new type of magic that I hope that she gets put into the MCU a little bit more, because I like her magic. I like Zelma a lot, and I said this online. She kind of was a little bit like Velma coded. Like, I felt like she had this Velma from the Scooby Gang aesthetic to herself, if you will.
Yeah, because I know she's a character much more in the Doctor Strange universe. I haven't read as many of those books. Yeah, so she's also part of. So it's also the Strange Academy. Their aspects. She's in that, but there was a whole. I know that there was a whole Doctor Strange storyline where magic got screwed up and they had to rebuild a bunch of it. But it's now Doctor Strange, Clea, Wong, and Zelma as being the team over there in the music.
If I can remember Clea correctly, that is Charlize Theron's character at the end of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. That little singer, right? That's her.
The woman in
so
purple.
They've all been introduced. I am excited. Then I want to see Velma with that team for sure. I'm ready for that.
But since we've sort of drifted over there, there's also the standpoints of what we're seeing too with the choices that were made with Zelma and Mrs. Stanton, which is played beautifully by Cree Summer. Love her.
Cool. I'm so happy that she's having her moment right now. Like, she's always been a voice, but I'm happy that she's kind of showing up visibly so people can see all of her awesomeness. She's great.
But the choices that even she's talking about that she had, even though she was studying at Comertage, was going to be a sorcerer and stopped because it was more important for her to raise her daughter, who either way is infused with magic.
Yeah.
But equally,
which I think is very much on par with what I do for a living, right? Like that shame-proof parenting. It's like she tried her best to shield her daughter from magic, and her daughter just made her own magic, like in her own room, if you will.
But Zelma also has the same problem Riri has of not having that forethinking and not being able to have that discernment about is like, this might not be a good idea just because, and that fundamental aspect of just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. Which is funny because that's Riri's whole retort. That's her defensive retort. Anytime anyone asks Riri, why did you do that? She like right away, because I can. Like, it's a very young adult answer. And I remember being that young adult thinking that, yeah, I can do this. I can do that. I can do that. Right. I think her and Zelma are really good together because they both show what that looks like. They both have mothers that are very in their lives. They both have mothers that have really committed to protecting them. And at the exact same time, that safety and that care, I think, has given them a little less discernment. They kind of feel like they can get through anything or they can solve anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the humanness that I like being represented for two Black girls. They're not in the struggle. They're not trying to, fight their way out of the hood. They're really just two Black girls with all this genius power trying to figure out, how do I harness it and how do I use it? And to be honest with you, that's exactly what Peter Parker's about. That's exactly what a lot of the young adult superheroes end up being. That's how Dick Grayson is when he's a young adult, trying to figure out how to be better than Bruce Wayne's Batman, right? I feel like you got Zelma and Riri doing the same thing. How do we be better than our counterparts that we know? We know Iron Man, we know Doctor Strange. They both name drop those people several times in their narratives. And at the same time, they're almost on the same path that Doctor Strange was on with his arrogance, and he could be the best sorcerer. And Riri's kind of on the same path as Tony Stark of, I can solve everything with another Iron Man suit. I kind of love that characterization, to be honest with you.
Very much so. So let's get into some of the other characters, too, because I think there's just as much major relevance there. So we've sort of jumped from Riri to a bit about Natalie, who is... And I love the Star Trek quote, the most human of them all. And just the nature of Natalie was beautiful in that aspect, even though I know we're getting the AI version of her, but still. Yeah. I think Natalie is an amazing character for that reason. Number one, she shows kind of that Black girl joy, that Black girl relationship that, when we get to see those glimpses of her and Riri before the accident, you see that they are connected. You see that Riri gets to be kind of the smart genius who's going to be like Stark, who's going to be like Pym, who's going to be like Jobs, And then you have her girlfriend, right, who was played beautifully by Lyric Ross. She is the girl who just wants to have a night with Thor and his hammer. Right? I love that they get to be girly, right, together, right? They don't have to compete with each other, right? You don't see Lyric trying to be smarter than Riri. You don't see Riri trying to take Thor away from, Natalie. You get to see them be these two sides of girlhood and still connect with each other, right? They kind of are each other's equal, if you will, right? Each other's partner, right? And I love that you get to see that, because when you meet Natalie as an AI, she's that. She helps Riri with her panic attacks. She reminds her that this dude is not cool and you might need to pay more attention. She actually still acts like a best friend, even in the AI space. Which I think also gets very much into a very common thing that we talk about when we're dealing with whether it's couples, families, and so forth, is the anticipatory mind, or the mental images that we build of other people in our heads, that live in our heads. Because even Natalie in AI form says there's parts I can't remember because it wasn't the true Natalie. It was the parts of her that continued to live in Riri's mind. And that's a big thing, especially when we're dealing with grief of losing someone. How those ghosts that are still living there, they're not going to evolve. And also another thing that often comes up, especially with couples work or just in general, is when people are expecting their loved one to evolve and they don't, because they don't have that bit of information, or the part that they're expecting to evolve was actually the part inside themselves.
Oof. Yeah. Oof. Right? I love that you brought that up too, because I think that's a great motif that they use with Riri, bringing about a version of Natalie that would serve her best. Right? It's not literally the version of Natalie that has her quirks and her flaws and all of these pieces that make her a full person and separate from Riri. What you notice is that, like you just said, and I think this is something that when we think of the ethics of grief and AI, not just in the TV show, even in today's world, we wonder, when we bring back our people, and this is kind of like a monkey's paw, Twilight Zone, will they be the person that we remember, or will they be some empty version of them? I think what we see with AI is that you can do your best to bring back your person, but they're only going to be external manifestation of what's internally, what you thought of them, right? And so I think this is an interesting discussion to be having, what you're saying, because grief oftentimes makes us wish we could just bring our person back. I could just bring them back, right? And Riri brings back Natalie, so to speak, quote unquote, but it's not the Natalie that's a full-bodied person. It's like what you said very astutely. It's whoever Riri believed Natalie to be, that version of Natalie that Riri wanted. Even down to, oh, you always give me help with my panic attacks. Like, she literally built a Natalie that would only be what she needed, not someone who might be more full-bodied.
Let alone the standpoint of Natalie, who would know when she's doing the AI stuff, would know how to start looking at these pieces of technology and start doing these searches, which I seriously doubt the other Natalie had any interest or knowledge in that. And so that also comes back to that piece of, we fill in the gaps about the people when we're building these mental images in our heads with the parts of ourselves as opposed to that actual part. And then we get that discrepancy, which we see in family and couples counseling, when they don't act the way that mental image said they would.
Yes, and that's where all the conflict comes in, right? You can't just mentally create an AI version of your partner that's going to do what you say, or an AI version of your kid who's going to listen. You actually have to learn how to live with and accept the full person that's with you, all of those quirks and all of those flaws. And that's something that I think Riri, if I can be honest with you, doesn't deal with. She just keeps building more tech, right? Instead of dealing with those issues.
Which brings it also back to what we were talking about earlier about Riri is intelligent. She isn't wise. Yes. And she doesn't necessarily have the best emotional intelligence either.
I agree. And you know what this is making me think of? It's making me think of how Tony Stark also tried to deal with his stuff with the barf technology. He kind of tried to use a little bit of AI too to manage his grief, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, Jarvis.
Yes.
But also we also saw
like Butler.
Yeah, but we also equally saw too how Tony dealt with his panic attacks, which was him running to the suit as well. In the second Iron Man movies. So that continual theme, and also dealing with how trauma and PTSD and complex PTSD will show up in the loops that people will stay stuck in.
Yeah, exactly. And how hard it is to come out of it.
Yeah. So I think we'll pause there because I know we've still got some other characters to talk about, and we'll do those in the second half here. But stay tuned for our continued chat here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered for Ironheart from the MCU universe. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dr. Mercedes Samudio. So we'll be back shortly.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Discover the power of music to heal and uplift. Introducing NeuroVibe, where rhythm meets recovery. NeuroVibe fuses ambient music textures with rhythmic layers to create music that goes beyond relaxation. It's crafted to resonate deeply, perfect for relaxation, self-reflection, or therapeutic sessions. NeuroVibe invites you to connect with your inner self through immersive sound. Explore NeuroVibe today on SoundCloud and experience the transformative power of music. Tune in, find your vibe, and discover what NeuroVibe can do for you. For more information, check out NeuroVibe on SoundCloud today at soundcloud.com/NeuroVibe-BrainSpotting. NeuroVibe is intended for general wellness and relaxation purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Explore NeuroVibe now on SoundCloud. Dive in, find your rhythm and feel better with NeuroVibe.
Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dr. Mercedes Samudio, and we are talking about our review of Ironheart from the MCU universe. And so we were talking about Riri especially, and we started talking about some of the other characters, and we're going to get a bit more into Parker's game as well. But I think one of the most critical characters that I think is an important one for us to talk about is Gary, who is the stepfather to Riri, and a man showing emotional intelligence, but also being very masculine too.
Yes. I think that was the wonderful crux to her character. So yes, I would love to talk about that.
And the fact that, as Riri's mother said, is like he could reach you. He had a skill with dealing with, quote unquote, damaged things, but no. And I don't think Riri was damaged even when she was younger, but still the standpoint of this is a man showing emotional intelligence and not being less, which is often a critique of Black men who do show emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm. All of the above. And what I love the show does is that it shows him in his element. So he's a mechanic, right? He's a hands-on kind of blue-collar worker guy who supports his family, who is a part of the community. If you notice, his mechanic shop, his auto shop is in the community, right? And so not only do I appreciate what you just said about his emotional intelligence, through all of the memories, right, that Riri has, or that Natalie shows Riri, all you see is this Black male dad showing up for her intelligence, listening to her when she would say things like, oh, why don't you try this? Or have you ever thought about this? He didn't tell her, oh, you're a kid, oh, you don't know. He brought her in. He listened to her, right? I think what this shows is that there's a way for us to support our children developing their voice, right, without making them feel less than. And on the terms of Black masculinity, I think it's a great example of how to show that vulnerability, how to really show that dialogue with a kid who's super smart, right? And you might not have that same level of smarts, but all you have to do is scaffold. All you have to do is support. All you have to do is really open up your shop and let her tinker around and, figure out who she is. Even that one episode where Natalie showed her how she got the name Ironhead, right? When she was kind of being herself and kind of being a little bit stubborn and hit the thing and hit her on the head, he didn't say, aha, that's what you get. He came over and said, well, how do you feel? Are you okay? He checked in on her, right? And lovingly gave her a name, Ironhead, because it just bounced right off of her head, right? She didn't have any bruises or anything. And so I say all that to say, these examples are done without pointing the finger at the camera and winking. This is a good dad, right? It's just showing this is what it looks like for a dad, right? A Black male father figure in this girl's life to just be there for her, right? Just to show up as she shows up. Even when you get to the flashback of what happened that day with the community violence, he pushed her down and went to go try to grab Natalie before all of it went down, right? That protection, right? And finally, before I kind of finish, I do appreciate you sharing that her mother, what is her mom's name is? Ronnie? Ronnie actually appreciated having that person in her life too. She wasn't envious or jealous of their relationship. She actually uses their relationship to remind Riri that people care about her, right? And even though Gary might be gone and he was the one to get through to you, we all still care about you too, right? And we all still want you to be safe too. And so I love that you can see in this family that everybody's role was honored, everybody's role was appreciated, right? And I think that was something that, again, needs to be represented in a mainstream TV show, if that makes sense.
And the same thing with Xavier, too.
Yeah, right. He shows up for her, right, in a really caring way, not in a forceful, not in a pushy way. Even, I'll say this, one of my favorite moments between them was when he finally found out about Natalie's AI, and he wasn't like happy with her. He held her accountable. He said, this isn't okay. You didn't get my permission. This is my sister that you're bringing back without even telling me. Right. Like, that was really honest to show that he doesn't have to always be in agreement with her, but even in his disagreement of her decisions, he still respected her and shared his feelings in a really respectful way.
Which is also showing about him dealing with grief as well. Now, I do also understand why Riri was upset when he gave her the mixtape, because he didn't warn her that was in there. Yeah. And there is another aspect of where we're seeing the mismatch in dealing with grief, in the standpoint, while it inspired him, it troubled her. And the aspect that grief is going to be different for every person. I also feel like I want to go back also to Wakanda Forever, especially in the scene where M'Baku is offering and accepting the decisions that Shuri was making as the princess and the next Black Panther. That wasn't about that overpowering. And the aspect, again, this is the other images of black male existence that often gets shunned. And as I was saying during our break, I was like, I was thinking in preparation for this, what we were going to talk about. And I couldn't help but keep coming back to that idea that some will go with the monolith idea that, well, you need a man in the household. You just need to fix this with a man. It's like, not every man has the portfolio per se to be that role that you're talking about. You want to fix it, then you need to find the black men who have these other qualities, not just because he's got the DNA of a man. Which also comes back to even the aspect of what I was saying earlier about the idea of people getting stuck in gang life. They're looking for their placement. And if anybody particularly can provide a degree of that, even if it is destructive, they ultimately have an ulterior motive destructive, guess what they're going to latch on to? And I think that is also a nice segue into talking more about Parker and his gang. And the array of characters there, which I also loved. I loved Mule so much.
No, I agree with everything you're saying. And it was a really interesting juxtaposition of masculinity, right? Where you've got Gary and Xavier, who are black men that are emotionally intelligent, even in their flaws, even in their missteps, they're able to show up and be present and say, I made a mistake, or this is how I felt. Versus, right, the men who are in Parker's gang, who are kind of like, we're going to do this by any means necessary. Like, we've got to do this. Their level of emotionality is not, I wouldn't say not intelligent, but I think they've learned a different understanding of how to take care of themselves as men, right? They've learned that they've got to take it by force. They've learned that they've got to show up and be whatever they think that machismo is. And it's interesting because when you look at Parker, right, he tried to do things really interestingly. When he showed up to, I forget the guy, a guy with the greenhouses, that guy was not intimidated by Parker at all. And in order for Parker to reach that level of intimidation, I watched him kind of give in to the evil of the cape a little bit, right? Because that man who he was trying to intimidate with all of his talk about contracts and I'm going to take your money from you, it didn't work, right? And so when you're thinking about that level of like masculinity that is sometimes blocking their grief and blocking their anger, and what happens in front of it is it becomes intimidation, right? It becomes, I have to intimidate you. I have to use force. He ends up even killing the guy, right? Because that guy won't give in to his whims, to his fantasy. And I think that's something that's really interesting when we talk about how do we manage our anger? How do we manage our grief? A lot of times underneath our grief and our anger is sadness, is depression, is even maybe shame, right? And all of these things that I think for Parker, he covered that up with the cape, the deal with Mephisto, and this idea that if he could get back these corporations, then he would really be the man that he wanted to be, and not seeing any other way out or any other liberating way to get to being the man he wanted to be.
Which doesn't help when you've got literally a demon of lies and human desire whispering in your ear.
Constantly whispering in his ear, right? Constantly showing him, if you just do a little bit more. And I love that when you finally meet Mephisto and he said, the people asked, Riri and Parker both asked, what do you want from me? And he says, oh, nothing you won't miss. And he's not wrong. He just totally takes small little pieces of you, right? You don't miss it right away, but he starts to just take it, right? Those little small moments where you decide, I'm going to take the more evil route than the more, good route, right? Those small moments, that's what Mephisto takes. That's what that kind of evilness takes from you. It takes those small decisions from you, right? Where you start to not know what's your own thoughts and what's Mephisto's thoughts. And I think for Parker, at that moment when he was at the heirloom heist, he was in that moment of, I can't get my way the way I've been doing it. I'm going to use this evilness. And that's where that slippery slope, I think, started for him for real.
Very much so. But I also think it, too, goes back into his cousin as well.
Yeah.
Who found him and took care of him, but puts him on this same path. And again, this is where I come back to also that aspect of how do people get caught up in gang life? And especially when a family member has also been in gang life.
And it looks like the only option. There's no other option. What else is there, right? What else is there?
Precisely. And I mean, again, love Parker's gang, love Clown, love Mule. The blood siblings is like, I'm trying to the name sticks in my memory. I know there's something more with their characters in the comics. I just couldn't think of what it was. But I love those characters as well. But also the standpoint of they were looking for family too. And what happens when the idea of the found family breaks down as well was an important one.
Well, because it's being led by someone who isn't really thinking of family, they're thinking of revenge. And so I think about that with Parker. Parker's whole reason for creating the gang wasn't so he could find a family, so to speak. It was so he could find people that could help him with his mission. Whoever could do that, that's who was part of the gang,
And additionally, the other aspect of family is only good when you're following my instructions. Family is only good when you're enjoying the good times. Even when they gathered to mourn, it's like there was just like how quickly that switched over to what's the mission so forth. Even when they were mourning the cousin, they wanted to sit down and talk about good memories about the cousin. But and obviously, again, grief, anger, revenge, and subject matter we were talking about earlier coming up, and he can't even involve himself in that. And even the idea of what he suggested about his cousin was the thing that let him just, let's get back to work.
I agree. And I think that's, again, what you're just highlighting. This is how people deal with grief. This is how he's always dealt with grief, even from his childhood, right? His dad did that to him, right? So his mom passed, right? His dad was like, okay, next issue, next mission, next, thing. This is his foundation. And you talked earlier about CPTSD. This is actually what it looks like. It's all of these things happening to you and you have no respite, no way of healing from it. It just keeps happening, keeps happening. You're kind of almost trapped in this cycle of trauma. And so when you're looking at someone like Parker, who has dealt with grief a few times before even getting to be an adult, and no one ever giving him the capacity or the space to manage that grief, all he has is his anger. All he has is his revenge that Mephisto comes right in and uses, right? And uses that. And so I think that's why for him, as the leader, quote unquote, of a group, all he sees people are is extendable pieces to this larger journey of revenge, right? If you don't listen to me, then you're not part of my family. If you don't do what I say, then you're not part of my family. If you're not on the same mission to do the same things I'm trying to do, then you're not part of my family, which is evidenced by him kicking everybody out at the end of it, right? Anytime someone challenged him, right, they got hurt, right? Or they got yelled at or they got kicked out. And so it's like, that type of leadership that's steeped in so much repressed grief, it only can come out that way.
And even to the point where his father says, oh, you probably screwed over a number of people to get here that you were theoretically close to. Yeah, he already knew the pattern because, well, let's be frank, he'd already, for lack of a better description, sold his own soul.
There you go. And that I love that juxtaposition that his dad didn't need Mephisto to sell his soul. His dad willingly did it. Whereas he's looking at his son who literally is wearing this cape and being influenced to sell his soul. It's a really interesting metaphor and juxtaposition there for sure.
And we use the term just because it's fun, but it's like to sell all the emotional choices that you have.
Yeah.
And let's be frank, and I'll be that we got a lot of that going on right now in the country as well. Who's selling parts of their emotional soul for power, control,
whatever,
their perceived certainty?
Yeah. That's a really deep cut, too, that you just said that, because I think people don't pay attention to it. This is why Mephisto's deal is so enticing. He says, you won't even miss it. That's when you ask Mephisto, what does it cost me? He'll say, don't worry, you won't even miss it. What you're talking about is that these little small moments where you sell, right, so to speak, your soul, you give up your decisions, right, to someone else because it's easier. Or you say, well, I was just following orders because it was easier just to follow orders and to challenge the leader who was giving you those orders, right? Like, I agree with you. I think we see a lot of this in our world. And when we go to point the finger, we very rarely have a hard time looking at how did I contribute to what's going on here? How is my ideology part of this, right? And for, I think, someone like Parker, it's easier to say it's what happened to me. It's easier to say it's the system than to even sit with the grief and the anger that he was dealing with. It was too much. I'd rather externalize it because that's a lot. That's a lot to deal with.
Which then leads us to the other major character reveal that was in this series, Ezekiel Stain.
Yeah, which was nice, right? I kind of appreciated his legacy discussion too, because you see this happen a lot in the media, that when someone dies, but we don't know how, we don't know what all the nefarious reasons are. This man was listed as Tony Stark's mentor who died in a plane crash. For those of us who have been watching the MCU since Iron Man, we know who this man is. We know what his motivations were. And so I think seeing this now in Ironheart is even more of a confirmation that someone like Riri is living in a world where people have changed the narrative, have withheld information, and she's still trying to navigate this world. And then you got someone like Ezekiel Stain, who knows what happened to his dad too, and is still having to deal with the world, who isn't paying attention to what his dad actually did.
But equally is also dealing with the idea that everybody knew what the public face is and he knew the private face.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Exactly.
Well, and again, I say this with my own experience, so that is just how much others will then want to hold on to the public face and ignore the very clear evidence that something wasn't right.
Yeah. But then the people who know have to hold on to that. They have to hold on to it. The people who know.
And where does their healing come from? Yeah. And that aspect is something that then draws into the aspect of how did, again, the greater community's emotional intelligence fail? Yeah.
Well, they failed both times. Riri and Parker both used him. They didn't care that his dad was, this guy. They really used the information he had to kind of for different reasons.
And
Riri, so to speak, to get new armor. Yeah, and his resources, right? It's funny because that you bring that up, because when they went to his bunker, it was really juxtaposed with all of that, biotech and things that he was into, but almost on every wall in Ezekiel or Zeke, right, in his room, in his house, he had that live, laugh, love. Like there was this guy who was trying his best to come out of it with these affirmations, but whatever reason, he was getting sucked back into his dad's legacy, his warmonger dad who had warmonger, tech. No matter how he tries to get away with his live, laugh, love affirmations, he kind of still ends up being a little bit like Obadiah, right? He kind of ends up being this guy on the outside trying to become somebody, right?
Well, but even too, the aspect of how many people wouldn't let him or even accept that this was somebody else. With even though he constructed a false identity and so forth, the notion that he wanted something else. And for all intents and purposes, he was actually trying to live it.
Yeah.
And again, what was being touted was, again, that destructive self. Because, I mean, I fully get what he says when I've got this anger that he doesn't know what to do with.
Yeah. And no one cared about it. Everyone just kind of glazed over it when he said stuff like that.
Which also becomes another of the components about dealing with grief, because I think between we get multiple facets of the path that grief can take in this series. And we got some of that also with Shuri as well. Well, let's be frank. We've seen it with Shuri. We've seen it with most of the Wakanda series has had a very heavy grief component into it. But
so with Spider-Man too. Spider-Man grieved Tony Stark quite a bit.
Yeah, I still have my issues with why does Peter Parker have to be taking over Stark's legacy? Why do we need someone to take over another person's legacy? Even though, Riri is doing that, but still the standpoint of like legacies are not something that always has to be taken up. And it's also going to take on the influence of the person who has taken it over, which doesn't mean that they're all for the same reasons the first person did, which I'm going to be frank. Yeah. I think people need to kind of be conscious about that with legacy brands. Yeah. You might have had faith when a certain person was running that company who was doing those things, but as soon as they get a new CEO, head board, and so forth, does not mean they're going to be doing and operating the same way that person does, which I think also leads into another thing about another theme that I see in comics that I think can be harmful. It goes against reality is those people who are the children of people who have been maliced in the world wanting to live a different life. Wanting to have something,
which is difficult.
And which comes even back to what we talked about with generational healing and generational historical trauma. People trying to take the other path, who are not trying to rule the world, go off the revenge for their parents, who are trying to do the laugh, love, and or even if that's a child wants to become a hero. This whole, I'm just thinking about in the DC universe, Black Manta and Aqualad, or I think he's now taking on the new Aquaman logo. But there is an aspect of you've got a father who, quote unquote, is a villain, and here is his son who is a hero. Yeah. And there's some very big diametrical things that I thought we love, but there are some things you're just not gonna.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like I feel for myself, I need more of those stories.
That's an interesting take, though, because I think those stories have a lot of validity, too. Like, what happens when the hero or the villain's kid doesn't want anything to do with that, or they switch? If I can kind of posit this as we start to wrap up, this is something I actually talk about a lot with parenting. When you are parenting from a mask or a character, your kids begin to only interact and engage with that character or that mask. That character or mask they can reject or accept, right? But when you're actually living as a full human, your children get to accept the human of you. They get to interact with you as a person, not as someone who's their mom or their dad or their protector or the person who did everything for them. You get to be human. So what I do in my work is teaching parents, who are you as a person? Yes, you have to make sure your kids are safe, but when you wear this mask, right, the villain mask, you better respect me, or the hero mask, I want my kids to love me. Either mask you wear is that. You can't be in all those extremes. Sometimes you're going to have to put your foot down and lay a boundary, but setting that boundary helps your children know what it means to exist in a human relationship. And sometimes you do have to open up and expand a little bit, but when you do that, that teaches children how to be in a human relationship in some space, in some gray area. And so when we go back to what you said, those heroes and those villains, they're such static characters with no fluidity that whoever their offspring end up being, they really are going to reject a lot of that staticness because, again, think about Batman and his Robins. Batman is so stoic and so one-dimensional that every Robin literally has to fend for himself because Batman refuses to take them in and actually support them, right? I teach parents, don't be a Batman. Like, don't let your kids fend for themselves. Pull them in, show them your humanness, show them your Bruce Wayne, show them the parts of you that are wounded and still trying to figure things out. You know what I mean?
Which also brings up the aspect, as we're jumped over there, to Batman, is the aspect of, Batman has built the structure of the Bat family, but not necessarily the substance of the Bat family.
There you go.
Which you see, one, why he has to have so many different Robins, but also the relationships you see between the Robins and even the Batgirls as well. And I think that's one of those areas where, again, even going back to what I was talking about with the mental images that we build into our minds about our family members, is that our loved ones, is that standpoint of when does the projected part, the filled in the blank part, the mask, when somebody can tell the difference between the two and they don't like them, they have the choice to walk away.
Yeah.
That relationship does not have the ability to function. There is a reason where endings are necessary. And of course, there's the struggle not to accept the ending, which we also get a lot of stories out of. But I think there is some narratives that we need to be putting out there about for those people who choose to make the other path.
Yes.
Because that's also putting the potential in the world.
Yeah, and I'll say this as we kind of wrap up, because I think you have a perfect ending here. That was kind of what happened at the end of season 1 of Ironheart. Riri had a hard time with ending. She has a hard time with letting things go, and as a result, makes a deal that, again, I think is really human, and it follows her character arc, but it's one of those things where it's like, if you have a hard time letting go, you're going to keep making deals and keep trying to bargain, if you will, with death in ways that don't allow you to have any level of healing, but in ways that you kind of end up holding that grief with you all the time and not letting it expand. And so I think that's a really great way that the show ended, to show the humanness of grief, that sometimes we can heal and we can let people go, and sometimes we just can't. We'll do anything to keep that person with us, anything. Which
then also is where we're hearing some of the comments about, isn't she supposed to be a good guy? It's like, and now you're realizing why you're having so much problem with this.
Yeah.
And that realization, and especially that standpoint of, you have a problem, or there is a problem with seeing the humanity.
Yep, you're right. Not wrong.
So it'll be interesting to see how this develops into Doomsday and the rest of those things, and as the rest of the MCU goes on. But otherwise, we hope you guys have enjoyed it. And I also say I love the music that they used in Ironheart. I added a few of those to my collection as well. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up here, and we'll be back for our next one of these as soon as we can. I don't know. Do you want to try and do Fantastic Four?
Yeah. Let's do that one. And I just want you to know, I've also seen Superman, so we can do that whenever you get a chance.
I haven't seen Superman yet, but yeah, we can put that on the list. Alrighty. Cool. So this has been, I'm Barry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, and this is Dr. Mercedes Samudio. This has been Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, and stay tuned. We'll be back for some more ones, folks, and take care.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.